I'm Ryan from ExtremeTerrain.com, and this is my review of the Teraflex 2.5-inch lift kit with shocks fitting all 2007 to 2016 JKs. This kit is for a 2-door JK, but there's also a kit available for a 4-door, and you can get the kit with your choice of shocks, shock extensions, or neither if you decide to add your own shocks. This lift kit is for those of you who want to add both ground clearance and clearance for slightly larger tires. You can actually fit up to a 35-inch tire with this lift kit, and are looking for a really complete kit. This is a little bit more expensive than some of the other lift kits on the market, but in my opinion it's worth it for the completeness and for the quality of the components that are included. As far as the components that are included in the kit, let's first talk about the springs. These are a 2.5-inch lift spring, so they are going to be longer than the factory springs, but they're also going to have a higher spring rate and be a little bit stiffer. That's nice because usually when you have a lift kit, you also have some other modifications that can start adding some weight to the vehicle. When you have a heavy front bumper, a winch, a big heavy spare tire, your springs can start to sag, and these will hold up weight a lot better than the factory springs will. The kit also includes all 4 Teraflex Nitro shocks. Having a nitrogen charge shock has some benefits over a hydraulic shock. The nitrogen charge in the shock can help to prevent foaming and cavitation of the liquid inside of the shock, which can eventually lead to shock fade. A nitrogen shock will generally ride a little bit firmer than a hydraulic shock, but some people like that because on the road it helps to control a little bit of body roll. This kit also includes both front and rear bump stop extensions. Now, bump stops serve a few different purposes on the Jeep. 1, they'll keep the tire from rubbing on the body, and 2, they'll protect both the shocks and the coil springs from damage. If you fully compress a shock or fully compress a coil spring, putting it into coil bind, you can damage those components, and the bump stops help to protect them. Anytime you're adding height to the Jeep, you'll also need to add some length to the bump stops. So the bump stops that are included in this kit are really important. I like especially the front bump stops that are in this kit because sometimes a bump stop extension will require you to drill and tap the front coil spring perch. These ones will go right in the factory bump stop location, which means no drilling and no tapping. The rear track bar bracket that's included in this kit is really beefy. It actually attaches to the axle in a total of 3 different locations, and it has a couple of different mounting holes so that you can adjust for the roll center on your Jeep. Having a weaker track bar bracket can cause the back of the Jeep to sway back and forth when you're driving down the road and going over bumps, so while this might not be the most exciting component you're putting on your Jeep, it is definitely important. Aside from all the hardware that's included in this kit, it also includes brake line relocation brackets. Anytime you're adding this much height to a suspension, it's important to extend the brake lines, especially if you're going off-road, disconnecting your sway bars, and really articulating and flexing especially the front axle of the Jeep. You can pull a brake line tight, and you certainly don't want to rupture a brake line. I personally prefer to put a new longer soft brake line in the front of the Jeep, but it requires a little bit more work than these brake line extension brackets do because you have to bleed out the system. No matter what method you use, whether it's the relocation brackets that are included in the kit or purchasing a new longer brake line, the most important thing is to extend the brake lines. Like I said before, this kit is really complete and the components that are included are really high quality. The only thing that you might want to add to the kit are front and or rear adjustable track bars to get the axles completely centered under the vehicle, but again, definitely not necessary. Getting this kit installed on our JK was pretty straightforward, and it installs just like most other lift kits would. The first step in the installation is to support the Jeep by the frame so that you can then remove or loosen any components to keep the axles from completely drooping. On this lift kit, we were able to completely remove both the front and rear sway bar links because the kit includes new sway bar end links for the rear, and we moved the rear factory links up to the front. Another part you can completely remove are both the front and rear shocks because of course this kit includes new ones. Now the most difficult bolt for me to remove on any lift kit installation is always the front top shock nut. There can be a lot of junk that gets thrown up in that area from the front tires, and that bolt is often really rusty. 9 times out of 10, if it's an older Jeep, you're just going to end up breaking the nut off. You're not even going to be able to remove it fully. So that's an area where I would definitely recommend hitting it with a good penetrating oil well before you get started. Other than that, you can remove 1 bolt from each of the track bars. We usually go with the axle side, but either side doesn't really matter. You'll have to remove the brake line bracket from the frame to give you enough slack to fully lower down the axle. And finally, you're going to have to loosen up and remove the bolts on the drive shaft at the axle. Otherwise, the drive shaft is going to contact the exhaust and the crossmember, and it's not going to allow the axle to completely droop. Once you have all those components removed or loosened up, you can then droop the axle down and the old springs will literally just fall right out. While you have them out, you can install your new bump stop extensions, put the new springs in, and install your new longer shocks. Then it's just a matter of putting everything else back together. You'll reattach the track bars, the brake lines using the new brake line extension brackets out back, and put your drive shaft back together. The bolts I always have a little bit of trouble getting lined back up after the lift kit is done are the track bar bolts. Just a little tip to help you get them lined up: after you get everything put back together, put the tires on the Jeep and get it sitting under its own weight. Then you can have a friend get in the Jeep and slightly turn the steering wheel back and forth. That'll help to line up the front track bar in the axle side bracket. Out back, you can just have somebody push on the Jeep, and having the extra weight of the vehicle and the extra leverage will help you get that lined up in the back. It makes lining up those bolts a lot easier. The whole installation should take you about 4 hours, and you won't need any specialty tools, just an assortment of sockets and open-ended wrenches. It will help to have an extra set of hands around, but it's not necessary. That install time will vary greatly depending on how rusty the Jeep is that you're working on, and if you have access to air or power tools and a lift. I think you get a lot of value for the price you pay for this lift kit. Like I said before, it is really complete. The only thing that I might consider adding if I was going to take the Jeep off-road would be longer front brake lines. When you sag the suspension down, the lines do get just a little bit too tight for my comfort level, but other than that, I really like this kit. It gives you everything you need to get the Jeep lifted, run a larger tire, give you some additional ground clearance, and completely change the look of the Jeep, all at a fair price. So that's my review of the Teraflex 2.5-inch lift kit with shocks fitting all 2007 to 2016 JKs that you can find right here at ExtremeTerrain.com.